So today I'll be talking about Sigmund Freud's theory of personality. And this theory has the psyche divided into three parts. Now these parts are systems. They're not actually physical parts of the brain. They're systems, and each one has different characteristics, and they work together throughout the lifespan. We'll start with the id. We have the id, the superego, and the ego. We'll start with the id. We can think of the id as the most primitive part of the psyche. It's all about satisfying needs. It doesn't have any regard for consequences. We can think of a newborn child as being all id. That's the only part of personality a newborn child has. They seek pleasure with no regard to consequences. The id contains instincts like eros, the life instinct, and thanatos, the death instinct. Another way to think of those instincts would be sex and aggression. The id is based on the pleasure principle. The id wants all the needs met immediately. It doesn't have any ability to wait, any desire to wait. All needs need to be met immediately. The id also does not change over the lifespan. It remains in the unconscious mind for as long as a person lives. It's not influenced by experience, stressors, learning. The id is always the same. The id is always trying to satisfy basic needs. The next part we have is the ego. So we have the id, we've covered the ego and the superego. We'll talk about the ego now. And the ego is in some ways similar to the id. It does seek pleasure, and it seeks to avoid pain. The difference with the ego is it introduces this idea of reality, of trying to be realistic about meeting needs. It uses what Freud referred to as the reality principle. So with the ego, we see a mediation. The ego mediates between the id and the superego. Of course, I'll get to the superego in a moment. So the ego has decision-making and problem-solving abilities. The ego does not, in itself, have morality. It doesn't have a sense of right or wrong or good or bad in a moral sense. It just seeks a realistic way to find pleasure and avoid pain. We can think of how the ego operates as an iterative process. It attempts to meet needs realistically. If it fails at that attempt, it tries it again. Right? It processes information, it tries it again. We call this reality testing. The last part of the psyche is the superego. And the superego develops somewhere around 5 years old. And it takes into account the influence of society. So the superego introduces moral standards to the equation, to the psyche. These moral standards it gains from experience, from being exposed to the environment, from the pressures of society. And the superego pushes against the id's desire to satisfy all needs immediately with no regard to consequence. So we can think of the superego as applying pressure with the ego to follow these rules of morality. So the superego is fighting the id, and it's negotiating with the ego because the ego is mediating between the id and the superego. A couple concepts with the superego would be the ideal self and the conscience. So the superego has certain tools it can use to influence the ego. If we consider the ideal self, if someone follows rules of morality, the superego can reward them through a sense of pride. So the ideal self is what somebody ought to be. It's what they believe they ought to be. And the superego can reward that with feelings of pride. On the other hand, if someone moves away from morality, they move away from the ideal self, the superego can punish them with feelings of guilt. So the id and the ego and the superego work together to help a person to make decisions to meet their needs, but to still be realistic and to follow the rules of society. I hope you found this video on the id, ego, and superego to be helpful. Thanks for watching.